As you settle in, close your eyes, and allow the quiet hum of history to carry you into rest. Let us journey together through the wind-blown steppes, across golden deserts and frozen rivers, through the ancient heart of Asia. Tonight, we fall asleep to the entire story of the Mongol Empire and the rise of one of the most powerful, mysterious, and misunderstood figures in human history, Genghis Khan. This is not a tale of battles and bloodshed, though history is never without its darker shades. Instead, it is a story of transformation, how scattered nomadic clans of the harsh Central Asian steppe came together, unified by a man born into obscurity, and reshaped the known world. It is a journey through yurts and mountains, whispered traditions, and windswept plains where horsemen thundered like storms across empires. We will drift calmly through centuries, across wide, unending landscapes, and into the rhythms of daily life, from the crackling warmth of felt-walled gears to the solemn rituals of the Mongol ancestors. This is the quiet conquest of your imagination, perfect for the gentle hours of the night. Let us begin our voyage. Before the Mongol Empire, before the name of Genghis Khan echoed across continents, the heart of Asia was a realm of wide skies and wandering peoples. The steppes, those vast, open grasslands stretching from the borders of China to the Caspian Sea, were home to a way of life shaped by wind, weather, and the rhythms of the horse. Life on the steppe was cyclical. Seasons governed movement, and clans traveled with their herds in search of the best pastures. Children were born into a world where survival depended on mobility, skill, and trust in one's kin. There were no cities here, no stone walls, only the rolling land, the shifting sky, and the songs of riders beneath the stars. The people of the steppe were not a single culture, but many Tatars, Naimans, Merkits, Carats, and Mongols, among others. These tribes often fought, traded, and intermarried. Power was fluid, alliances temporary. One's position could rise or fall in the span of a generation or a single season. Yet despite the turbulence, a deep and ancient culture lived among these nomads. Their stories were passed through oral epics, their ancestors honored in sacred rituals, their daily lives structured by a code of hospitality, courage, and endurance. Where horses were not just animals, they were companions, warriors, and symbols of freedom. Drifting further into this world, we begin to understand how the elements of empire were already in motion, waiting for a catalyst, a leader, a vision to bind them. The steppe peoples held a spiritual worldview tied to nature. Their religion, known as Tengrism, revolved around Tengri, the eternal blue sky, a vast, all-seeing force above, paired with Temujin, the fertile Mother Earth below. The Mongols believed that their Khans ruled not by birthright alone, but by the will of Tengri. If a ruler governed wisely and honorably, his success was a sign that he held the favor of the sky. But if he abused power, disaster, droughts, defeats, disease might signal divine disapproval. This spiritual balance shaped how the Mongols viewed conquest and leadership. Genghis Khan himself would later speak of his rise as a divine mission. But for now, we are still in a time of tribes, scattered like stars across the steppe, each with its own dreams, fears, and legends. Imagine a morning on the steppe. The sun rises over the horizon, casting gold across the dew-dappled grass. From inside a circular felt yurtigar, as the Mongols called it, comes the soft sound of waking life. Children stir beneath woolen blankets. A pot of milk tea simmers above a central hearth. Outside, herders check the animals: goats, yaks, camels, and horses. A young rider gallops across the land, not for show but necessity. There is always work to be done, tending the herd, making tools, drying meat, preparing for the next journey. Buy meals were simple but nourishing. Dried curds called arowel, meat boiled in iron cauldrons, fermented mare's milk called air. Despite the hardship of nomadic life, there was a profound sense of rhythm and community. Songs filled the evening air. Elders recited tales of past glories. Children learned to ride before they could walk, and always, the horizon called. There was no permanence, only movement, adaptation, and memory passed from generation to generation. In this way of life, the roots of Mongol strength were forged: discipline, unity, and a remarkable ability to endure. To the south of the steppe lay the sophisticated civilizations of China, at times united under mighty dynasties, at other times fragmented and weak. Further west, the Islamic world flourished, from Persia to the Seljuk Turks in the distant lands of Europe. Kingdoms rose and fell with little knowledge of the peoples beyond the great deserts and mountains. From the perspective of the settled world, the nomads were often seen as barbarians, wild horsemen with no cities or books. But the steppe peoples, including the Mongols, saw themselves as resilient and free, unchained by walls or rigid customs. They believed that their way of life, hard though it was, bred strength. There were already whispers among the tribe's prophecies and legends that one day a leader would rise, someone who would unify the clans and bring order to the steppe, someone born not into comfort, but hardship. That leader's name, when it finally came to be known, would resound from the banks of the Yellow River to the plains of Hungary. That name was Temujin, the man the world would know as Genghis Khan. Much of what we know about this era comes from a unique document known as the Secret History of the Mongols, written shortly after Genghis Khan's death. It is part myth, part memoir, and part manual for rule. It gives us a window into his life, but also into the values and worldviews of the Mongol people. Other sources include Chinese dynastic records, Persian chronicles, and later European accounts, each with its own biases and gaps. The Mongol story is not one told by a single voice, but echoed across languages and centuries, pieced together like fragments in a tapestry. Tonight, we'll follow that tapestry thread by thread. We'll move not through battles and politics alone, but through songs, weather, migrations, and memory. This is a story not just of an empire but of a way of life now vanished out, the man who stood at its heart. As we prepare to begin Chapter 1, take a moment to relax. Let your breathing deepen. Picture the endless grasslands beneath you, the sound of wind in your ears, the scent of pine and dust in the cool morning air. You are no longer in your room, but beside a campfire on the ancient steppe. The stars above you are the same ones Genghis Khan once gazed upon. Time blurs, and memory becomes story. As we move forward, we'll follow Temujin from birth to exile, from obscurity to glory. We'll walk beside him as he learns the cruel lessons of loyalty and betrayal. We'll meet his family, his enemies, and his followers, and we'll witness how, through vision and violence, he became master of the greatest land empire the world has ever known. But for now, drift softly into sleep. Let history unfold like a scroll in the wind. The wind moved softly across the steppe. It carried the smell of crushed grass and distant wood smoke, brushing gently across the small encampment nestled near the Anan River. Here, around the year 1162, a boy was born beneath the open sky. His name was Temujin. His birth was said to have been marked by signs. He came into the world clutching a clot of blood in his fist. Among the Mongols, this was an omen, one that foretold greatness or destruction, or both. But for his family, it was not yet clear which path would unfold. His father Yasuge was a tribal leader of modest strength, known for his alliances and cunning. His mother Ellen was a woman of powerful will, taken by Yasuge from her original husband. In a traditional bride-stealing raid, she would become the enduring force behind Temujin's survival. Temujin's early years were defined by movement. The family traveled with their herds, setting up and breaking down their gur, moving with the seasons like their ancestors had done for centuries. Life was hard, but not yet cruel. There was warmth in the evenings, stories shared under the stars, the quiet routines of childhood. He learned to ride early, as all Mongol children did. He watched the men hunt, he listened to the women sing. And, even as a child, he absorbed the unspoken codes that ruled the world around him: loyalty, bravery, and above all the necessity of strength. But this peace would not last. When Temujin was still young, his father Yasuge was poisoned by the Tatars, enemies of the Mongol clans. While traveling alone, he had accepted food from them, unaware of their intentions. He returned home ill, his body weakening. Soon, he died, and with his death, the fragile protection over Temujin and his family vanished. The tribe that once followed Yasuge abandoned his widow and children. They were seen as a burden, without power or alliances to secure their place. Ellen, left with several young children, now faced survival alone on the unforgiving steppe. They had no herds, no warriors, and no one to rely on but each other. From this moment onward, Temujin's life was shaped not by tradition, but by struggle. In the bitter cold of winter, the family survived by digging up roots, trapping small animals, and collecting wild berries when they could. Hunger was constant. At times, they chewed leather softened over the fire. Every day tested their endurance. Temujin learned early that the world owed him nothing. If he was to live, it would be through will and action alone. Yet even in this hardship, a fire was building within him. He remembered his father's words. He watched how other clans acted, how alliances formed, how power shifted with loyalty and betrayal. He saw what it meant to lead not just through blood, but through the ability to inspire others to follow. His first taste of internal betrayal came from within his own family. As a teenager, Temujin quarreled with his older half-brother Beg. The tensions between them escalated until, in a moment of calculated violence, Temujin and his younger brother killed him. It was not done out of rage, but out of a belief that Begta threatened their unity and survival. Among the steppe peoples, leadership often depended on decisive action. Temujin would carry the weight of this choice for the rest of his life. Over the years, the family began to recover. Temujin slowly built ties with other clans and families. One of his earliest and most important friendships was with a boy named Jamka. They swore brotherhood to one another in the steppe tradition, sharing dreams of glory and future power. For a time, they were inseparable, both sons of the steppe, both imagining a world they might one day rule. Yet this friendship too would bend and break. For now it was a bond of youth, formed under the vast Mongolian sky, before the tides of ambition pulled them apart. Temujin also sought protection from powerful leaders. One of the most significant was Togrul, the Khan of the Karat tribe, who had been an ally of his father. Togrul agreed to recognize Temujin as his adopted son, offering both political support and military strength. This alliance would become one of the early stepping stones in Temujin's rise. As he entered adulthood, Temujin took a wife. Her name was Bert, and she came from the Anjarat tribe. Their union was arranged, as was tradition, but it proved to be one of genuine loyalty and affection. Bert would remain by his side through hardship and victory, a constant in the storm of his ambitions. Yet even their union was not safe from the chaos of the times. Not long after their marriage, Bert was kidnapped by the Merkits, a rival tribe. This act was both a personal and political insult, one Temujin could not ignore. He called upon Togrul and Jamuka, uniting their forces in a campaign to rescue her. Together, they succeeded. Bert was recovered. This victory not only restored Temujin's honor, but also marked his first significant military success. It sent a message to others on the steppe. Temujin was not a boy of misfortune. He was a man of action. In the wake of this rescue, the following began to grow. He attracted warriors not only by blood or clan, but by merit. He chose his companions based on ability, not lineage, a radical idea in a world where family ties often dictated status. This simple change would become one of the cornerstones of his future power. Temujin's approach was both practical and revolutionary. He offered protection, food, and opportunity to those who pledged loyalty. In return, he demanded discipline, unity, and absolute devotion. He rewarded bravery, but punished betrayal swiftly. Slowly, his reputation began to spread not just as a warrior, but as a leader with vision. But vision alone was not enough. To unite the steppe, he would have to face those who once called him brother. The friendship with Jamuka, once so full, what a promise, had begun to fray. Their views of power were different. Temujin sought a new kind of rule, while Jamuka clung to the old ways of tribal aristocracy. Their rivalry would soon erupt into open conflict. Yet for now, the wind calms again. The steppe is quiet. Temujin lies beside the fire, eyes turned upward toward the same stars that watched his ancestors. He is not yet Genghis Khan, but something is stirring. The seeds have been sown. Sleep now, and let the next chapter unfold in its own time. The scent of grassland lingered in the air as morning broke over the eastern horizon. Smoke curled gently from the low fires of scattered encampments. Temujin rose early. He moved quietly, as he always did, his eyes scanning the plains not just for enemies, but for omens, patterns, possibilities. He was no longer the forgotten son of a fallen chieftain. His influence was spreading, but so too were the challenges that came with it. As more clans joined his cause, Temujin began shaping his coalition into something different, something more than just a loose group of allies. He divided his growing force into units of tens, hundreds, and thousands. This decimal organization was practical, efficient, and symbolic. Each warrior knew his place, and each leader was chosen for loyalty and ability, not birth. In a land where bloodlines once ruled everything, Temujin's meritocratic structure was revolutionary. These units, called Arbon, Jagan, and Mingen, were not merely military arrangements. They were families in battle, responsible for one another's lives. A man who disobeyed orders did not just risk his own fate, he endangered his whole unit. Order was not imposed through fear, but through trust. Those who followed Temujin knew they would be cared for, provided for, remembered. He shared spoils generously, listened to counsel attentively, and honored even the lowliest among his warriors. Still, the old world did not yield easily. Temujin's greatest rival, once his closest friend, was now his most dangerous enemy. Jamuka had gathered a powerful alliance of traditional noble clans. They saw Temujin's rise not as justice, but as disruption. He was threatening the balance of the old elite, giving power to shepherds and orphans, changing rules that had stood for generations. The two forces met in what would become one of the defining confrontations of early Mongol history. The field near the Anan River turned to dust under the hooves of thousands. Temujin's forces, though smaller, fought with cohesion and discipline, yet Jamuka's larger force overwhelmed them. The defeat was bitter. Captured warriors from Temujin's ranks were subjected to cruel punishment. Jamuka, determined to send a message, executed many of them in horrifying fashion, reportedly boiling 70 of them alive. This moment burned into the memory of those who remained with Temujin. It was not only a loss, it was a call to resolve, a reminder of the price of disunity. Temujin withdrew. He rebuilt slowly. He did not retaliate in haste. Instead, he deepened his alliances, reaching out to tribes that had stayed neutral or fearful. He listened. He offered something the steppe had never seen before, not just strength but order, a vision. And so the tide began to turn. Over the next several years, Temujin forged a powerful confederation. He brought together the Mongols, the Karats, the Naimans, and others, not all willingly. Some were persuaded by diplomacy, others by the promise of spoils, and some by force. But always, Temujin's method was clear. He did not destroy what he could use. He absorbed, adapted, and reorganized. Among his key supporters were a group of men known as the Four Hounds and the Four Steeds, his most trusted generals and friends. These men, including Bawarku, Jelm, and Subutai, would serve him loyally for decades. Their loyalty was not commanded, it was earned. Temujin. Laws began to form, too, shaped into a growing code that emphasized unity, discipline, and shared responsibility. Theft was punished, desertion in battle was condemned, but those who obeyed the code were rewarded, regardless of their lineage. In the steppes where life had long been shaped by chaos and shifting allegiances, Temujin was bringing something: new structure, vision, and a sense of destiny. Then, in 1206, after years of conflict and unification, the leaders of the Mongol tribes gathered at a great Kurultia council of chiefs and elders. It was there that Temujin was formally given a new name, not just a title, but a declaration. He became Genghis Khan. That the meaning of the title remains debated. Some say it meant universal ruler, others interpret it as oceanic or firm. But for those present, it was clear he was no longer simply a man. He was a force, chosen by the eternal blue sky to rule all the people of the steppe. Under Genghis Khan, the Mongol identity began to take shape as something larger than tribe. No longer defined by individual clans, the Mongols were now one people. Their shared language, customs, and way of life became the foundation of something vast. Genghis Khan did not merely want to lead, he wanted to build. Yet even as he consolidated power, he looked outward. To the south, the Jin Dynasty ruled northern China, wealthy, well-organized, and culturally rich. The Jin emperors had long sought to keep the nomads divided, using diplomacy and gifts to play one tribe against another. Genghis Khan saw through this. He knew the pattern. He also knew the value of silk, grain, and trade, and he believed the steppe people deserved more. The first raids into Jin territory were swift and brutal. Genghis Khan's forces moved quickly, using speed and precision. They struck supply lines, avoided fortified cities, and took what they needed. The Mongols, born in the saddle, fought unlike any army the Chinese had known. Their bows could shoot far and with deadly accuracy. Their horses, small but tireless, allowed them to travel vast distances with little rest, and above all, their discipline was unmatched. Still, Genghis Khan did not seek only to destroy. He sent envoys, he offered terms, he understood the value of diplomacy and trade. But when his envoys were disrespected or killed, he did not forget. He believed firmly in reciprocity, kindness for kindness, destruction for betrayal. It was this, a mix of strategy and ruthlessness, that made the Mongol war machine so effective. They were not simply raiders, they were organized, intentional, and astonishingly adaptive. Engineers captured in China were used to build siege engines. Administrators were kept alive and employed. Local customs were respected where possible. Resistance was crushed, but loyalty was often rewarded. As Genghis Khan's campaign expanded, he continued to refine his laws and administration. His Yasa code of laws and customs was not written down, but memorized and enforced strictly. It promoted justice, merit, and obedience. It forbade blood feuds. It regulated everything from hunting to trade to court procedure. In a vast and diverse empire, it brought a surprising level of order. He also established a courier system, the yam, which allowed messages and orders to travel across great distances with remarkable speed. Mounted messengers carried sealed dispatches from post to post, day and night. It was, in many ways, a precursor to the modern postal service. Genghis Khan was not content to rule merely the Mongol homeland. He believed the world was his to unify, not through tyranny alone, but through law and purpose. Yet he remained grounded in the beliefs of his people. He worshipped the eternal blue sky. He sought the approval of the spirits, and he remained connected to the daily life of his people, eating their food, sleeping in their gairs, sharing their burdens. He also faced deep personal losses. His beloved son Joki, whose paternity had long been questioned due to Bert's earlier abduction, became a source of tension. Though Genghis Khan recognized him, their relationship was never easy. Rivalries between his sons would eventually shape the future of the empire he built, but those days were still ahead. For now, the empire was rising like a storm across the plains. Cities that had once mocked the nomads now trembled. Caravan routes, once plagued by bandits, now moved in safety. From Korea to the Caspian Sea, word spread of a leader who changed the world through vision, strategy, and fear. Yet back in his homeland, in the stillness of the night, Genghis Khan would sit by the fire, gazing upward. The stars moved slowly overhead, just as they always had. Beneath their cold light, a man who had been cast out as a boy now held the fate of nations in his hands. And so, we drift into sleep once more, carried by the wind over the grasslands, where the quiet footfalls of horses echoes softly through time. The empire moved like a shadow over the mountains. At first it was only a whisper, a rumor of riders, a distant thrum of hooves, but then cities began to vanish, and rulers fell silent. The world beyond the steppe had not yet grasped what was unfolding. Genghis Khan was not simply building a kingdom, he was reshaping the map of the known world. After the successful unification of the Mongol tribes in early campaigns against the Jin Dynasty, Genghis Khan turned westward to the Khwarezmian Empire. It was a sprawling realm stretching across Persia, Central Asia, and into modern-day Afghanistan. Wealthy, cultured, and ruled from splendid cities like Samarkand and Bukhara, the Khwarezmian Empire was a jewel of the Islamic world. At first, Genghis Khan saw trade, not war. He sent a caravan of merchants with gifts and a proposal for peaceful commerce, but something went terribly wrong. The governor of a border town, suspecting the caravan of espionage or perhaps driven by greed, arrested the Mongol merchants and seized their goods. Genghis Khan responded calmly, sending 3 envoys to resolve the matter. Instead, one of them was killed, and the others humiliated. That moment changed history. To Genghis Khan, envoys were sacred. Their mistreatment was not simply an insult, it was an unforgivable breach of law and honor. The Khwarazm Shah had made a fatal mistake. What followed was not just retaliation, it was deliberate, relentless devastation. The Mongols poured into the empire like a tide. They bypassed mountain ranges that were thought impassable, crossed frozen rivers, and struck with terrifying precision. City after city fell. The Mongols employed tactics suited to every situation surrounding cities, cutting off supplies, and offering surrender before storming the walls. In Samarkand, the defenders put up a fierce resistance. The city was proud, filled with scholars, artisans, and merchants. But once it fell, Genghis Khan made an example. The ruling elite were executed, and the city was sacked. He spared skilled artisans and those who surrendered early, but resistance was punished harshly. In Bukhara, he made a rare public appearance, riding into the mosque and addressing the citizens directly. He told them, "I am the punishment of God. If you had not committed great sins, God would not have sent a punishment like me upon you." To many, these words were terrifying, but to the Mongols, they reflected a belief in cosmic order. Genghis Khan saw himself as an instrument of fate, bringing balance to a world grown arrogant, corrupt, and fragmented. As the Mongols advanced through Central Asia, they brought not only destruction but also order. In every region, they established networks of control, appointing governors, protecting trade routes, and demanding tribute. They took from the world what it offered, and reshaped it in their image. And still, they rode farther, into the deserts of Persia, past crumbling citadels and palaces lined with turquoise tiles. They crossed into lands where the air was thick with spices and the markets rang with poetry. And everywhere they went, they left behind not just ashes, but administration. Genghis Khan knew that conquest meant little without stability. He sent his sons ahead to govern, to learn the cultures they entered, to manage taxation and diplomacy. He invited scribes and scientists into his court. He learned from every land he conquered. In the midst of these campaigns, tragedy struck. His favored general Jelm fell in battle. His own sons, though brave, quarreled often over territory and legacy. The pressures of an empire that now stretched thousands of miles began to show. Genghis Khan, once a herdsman and outcast, now ruled more people than any man alive. And still he remained tethered to his roots, even in the palaces of China and the gardens of Persia. He preferred his felt tent, his simple food, and the open skies. He distrusted stone walls and gold thrones. To him, a leader must remain close to his people, alert to their needs, and humble before the eternal blue sky. Yet his rule was not only about vision, it was about order. The Yasa, his great law, continued to grow. It included rules for trade, property, crime, and family. It set punishments for theft, rewarded loyalty, and regulated military service. It forbade the kidnapping of women and banned the hunting of certain animals during breeding seasons. It was both practical and symbolic, an invisible structure that bound the empire together, and it worked. The Silk Road, once dangerous and unpredictable, became safe under Mongol watch. Caravans traveled freely from China to the Mediterranean. Goods, ideas, and people moved across the empire with a speed and efficiency the world had never seen. A Persian merchant could now exchange letters with a Chinese scholar. A Venetian traveler named Marco Polo would one day follow these same routes in AEW, but that was still to come. For now, Genghis Khan continued to move. He returned east to deal with the lingering threats of the Yuan Dynasty. He oversaw the training of his grandsons, planted garrisons in key regions, and held vast gatherings with tribal elders. He rode across deserts, mountain passes, and river valleys. He was tireless. In his later years, he began to speak more often of the past, of his mother, Helen, who had taught him strength, of Jamuka, whose death had marked the end of his youth, of Bert, who had remained his quiet center through decades of war, and of the eternal blue sky, whose favor he hoped he had not lost. Death, to the Mongols, was not feared. It was part of the great cycle. Genghis Khan did not fear it either, but he knew his time was approaching. In 1227, during a campaign against the Tangut people in western China, he fell from his horse. The injury worsened. Some sources say it was internal bleeding, others hint at assassination. But the truth was simple: his body had grown old, though his spirit had not. He gave orders in his final days. His empire was to be divided among his sons, his burial was to be kept secret, and his legacy, his laws, his structure, his dream of unity was to endure. When he died, the world did not yet understand what it had lost or what had been unleashed. His body was returned to Mongolia, buried in a hidden grave, its location lost to time. Some say a river was diverted to cover it, others claim his escort killed all who saw the funeral. His tomb, like much of his life, remained shrouded in mystery, but his empire lived on in the years to come. His descendants would expand the Mongol reach even further into Russia, India, and the heart of Europe. They would burn cities, forge alliances, and rule dynasties that would shape trade, religion, and culture for generations. And always, they would invoke his name, Genghis Khan, the master of the steppe, the unifier of the tribes, the storm from the east. Yet here, in the quiet of your room, with sleep gently pulling at your thoughts, we remember something simpler. A child who was left behind, a boy who rode alone in the cold, a leader who rose not through cruelty but through vision, resilience, and the strength to forgive. The steppe is silent again. The stars wheel overhead, slow and ancient. Somewhere, a horse stirs, a fire crackles, and the wind whispers the name of the Khan who once ruled the world. Let that sound carry you deeper into rest, into dreams older than memory, where history breathes with a steady, calming rhythm. The steppe had grown quiet, but the empire did not sleep. With Genghis Khan's passing, the vast domain he built was left to his sons. Though his voice was gone, his vision remained carried in the memory of his people, in the lines of his laws, in the thunder of hooves moving westward and eastward under the eternal blue sky. The Mongol Empire, now the largest contiguous land empire the world had ever seen, had to be divided to remain strong, as instructed by Genghis Khan before his death. His 4 sons, Jochi, Chagatai, Gadai, and Tolia, received separate regions to oversee. But the unity of the empire was to be preserved through a single great Khan, chosen by consensus and recognized as the supreme ruler of all Mongols. Jochi, the eldest, had already passed away shortly before Genghis Khan. His land far to the west was left to his sons, Bato and Orda. Chagatai, the strict and legal-minded second son, received Central Asia. Tolui, the youngest, held the Mongol heartland, but it was Gadai, chosen by his father, who would become the next great Khan. Gadai was not the most brilliant of the sons, but he was balanced, calm in temperament, capable of both stern rule and thoughtful delegation. He embodied many of the qualities his father had valued: humility, discipline, and a deep understanding of the importance of structure. When he was formally enthroned in 1229 at a grand Kurultai, the empire once again stood united under a single voice. Gadai's rule began not with conquest, but with consolidation. He focused on building the empire's infrastructure, improving communication routes, reinforcing the Yam courier system, and ensuring that merchants and diplomats could move freely and safely. He ordered the construction of the first true Mongol capital, Karama city in the Orkhan Valley, built with stone, equipped with a palace, and filled with craftsmen brought from conquered lands. But peace was not the goal of the Mongols. It was merely the breath between campaigns. The momentum of conquest could not be stilled. And so, under Gadai, the Mongol armies surged west again. To the west, Batu Khan, son of Jochi, led a massive expedition into the lands of the Rus. The Mongols encountered fierce winters, swollen rivers, and stubborn defenders, but they adapted quickly. They crossed ice-covered rivers, laid siege to wooden forts, and burned cities that refused to submit. Kiev, once a beacon of Orthodox Christianity and trade, was reduced to ruin in 1240. The Mongols moved swiftly through Eastern Europe into Hungary and Poland. They defeated knights and princes with tactics honed on the steppe, feigned retreats, swift encirclement, and the relentless use of archery. At the Battle of Mohi, the Hungarian army was crushed. At Legnica, Polish forces fell to Mongol precision. Europe was stunned. There was no warning, no understanding of what had arrived. To the kings and bishops of Christendom, the Mongols appeared not as a people but as a force of nature. Whispers of monstrous horsemen, of cities turned to ash, filled the courts of Europe with fear, and yet, just as suddenly as they had arrived, the Mongols turned back. The reason was not defeat, but the death of Gadai. Mongol law required that all princes return to the homeland for the selection of a new great Khan. Bata withdrew. Despite his success, Europe, spared by the rhythms of Mongol succession, would never forget how close it had come to destruction. Back in the east, other campaigns continued. The conquest of the Yuan Dynasty, left unfinished by Genghis Khan, was brought to completion. Chinese cities fell one after another, and the Jin emperor was driven from his throne. Mongol dominance now stretched across northern China, but not all was smooth within the empire. With Gadai's death in 1241, succession again became a matter of politics and persuasion. His son Gyeok was enthroned after years of debate, but his rule was short-lived. Factions began to form, especially between the lines of Tolui's and Gadai's descendants. Power no longer moved isolated. It had to be claimed, defended, and argued. In the midst of this turmoil rose a new figure, Mugi, the son of Tolui and the grandson of Genghis Khan. Strong, quiet, and deeply committed to the principles of his grandfather, Mugi was chosen as great Khan in 1251. With his reign, the empire found clarity again. Its reach expanded even further. He entrusted his brothers with great responsibility. Hulagu, his younger sibling, was sent west with a massive army. His task, to conquer the remaining strongholds of Islamic power in Persia and beyond. The Mongol campaign against the Abbasid Caliphate was swift and devastating. In 1258, they arrived at the gates of Baghdad, once the glittering jewel of the Islamic Golden Age. The city was a center of learning, art, and religion. But when the Caliph refused to surrender, the Mongols unleashed their full force. Baghdad was taken. The libraries burned. The house of wisdom where centuries of knowledge had been gathered was destroyed. Thousands perished. The rivers of the Tigris were said to have run black with ink and red with blood. It was one of the great turning points of medieval history. Hulagu pushed farther, toward Syria and the Levant. But at the Battle of Ain Jalut in 1260, Mongol expansion met a rare defeat at the hands of the Mamluks of Egypt. The myth of Mongol invincibility cracked, though only slightly. Meanwhile, in the east, another brother of Mungik begun campaigns into China, where the mighty southern Song dynasty still held sway. Kublai was not just a warrior. He was a scholar, a statesman, a man of curiosity and tolerance. He adopted many Chinese customs, employed Confucian advisors, and studied Buddhist teachings. But these differences also caused tension. Other Mongol princes saw Kublai as straying from tradition. And when Mungenji died suddenly in 1259 during a campaign in China, the question of succession erupted into open conflict. Kublai claimed the title of Great Khan, but so did his cousin, Arik Bey K. The empire, once a unified breath beneath the eternal sky, began to fracture. The Mongol Empire, though still vast and mighty, was no longer a single entity. It splintered into four great khanates: the Yuan Dynasty in China under Kublai, the Ilkhanate in Persia under Hulag's line, the Chagatai Khanate in Central Asia, and the Golden Horde in the western steppes of Russia and Ukraine under Batey. Each ruled in its own way, but all looked back to Genghis Khan as the source of legitimacy. And so, the story that had begun with a child abandoned in the snow had grown into a tapestry that stretched across oceans, deserts, and mountains. His name lived in lore, in legend, in fear, and in respect. Cities flourished under Mongol protection. Trade boomed. Ideas crossed borders faster than ever before. The world, once fragmented, had been tied together if only briefly by a single vision. But time moved slowly forward. Even in the silence of empire, the khanates, once bound by loyalty, began to drift apart. Cultures mixed. New languages were born. Rulers married local princesses, adopted local faiths, and adapted to local ways. The Mongols, once nomads without borders, had become stewards of cities, patrons of poets, and emperors of civilization that instill, somewhere in the night wind, in the rustle of steppe grass. His name remains not as a conqueror, not as a tyrant, but as a symbol of possibility, of what can rise from hardship, of what can be built with vision, law, and unity. As you rest, picture the firelight inside a gur flickering softly against felt walls. Outside, the horses graze under the stars. The mountains wait. The sky, deep and endless, watches without judgment. The journey is not over, but sleep now. Let the story carry you onward. In the shadow of great empires, there are always smaller stories, threads that run quietly beneath the grandeur of conquests and coronations. Now, as the Mongol world stretched across continents, the most powerful empire on earth had entered its next phase. Not through storm and fire, but through rulers who had to govern what had already been won. The legacy of Genghis Khan endured not only in battlefields but in the laws, roads, and systems that now governed tens of millions of people. The empire was no longer a simple expression of tribal unity. It had become something more complex, a web of cultures, traditions, cities, and peoples, all under the banner of the Great Khan. That the capital of this changing empire was no longer the windswept plain. It was now the city of Karakoram under Gedai, and then under Kublai Khan. This city grew not only in stature, but in diversity. Persian engineers constructed stone buildings, Chinese artisans crafted temples and pagodas, Muslim astronomers plotted stars beside Buddhist monks. It was a cosmopolitan center unlike anything the steppes had ever seen. Yet the heart of the empire still beat with the rhythm of the nomadic past. Mongol rulers continued to hold court to massive open-air assemblies of nobles and generals. Even in the shadow of palaces, decisions were made intense, with fermented mare's milk offered to the spirits, and voices raised under the open sky. Though cities rose and customs blended, the foundation remained grounded in the values of the steppe. Among all of Genghis Khan's descendants, none would cast a longer shadow than Kublai Khan. Kublai was born in 1215, at the height of his grandfather's campaigns. As a boy, he showed signs of sharp curiosity and a love for learning. While many of his cousins focused on archery or conquest, Kublai read Chinese classics, studied Buddhist texts, and met with scholars from distant lands. His education was wide, and his ambition quiet but constant. When he came of age, he was given command of Mongol forces in northern China. There, he saw firsthand the challenges of ruling a settled, agricultural people. Unlike the nomads of the steppe, the Chinese lived in dense cities with long bureaucratic traditions and elaborate rituals. To govern them effectively, Kublai realized he would need to understand their culture and win their respect. And so, he adapted. He adopted Confucian ideals. He wore Chinese robes, consulted Chinese advisors, and began building a court that it resembled the imperial dynasties he now claimed to replace. But even as he embraced the forms of Chinese power, he never forgot his heritage. His tent still stood in the palace courtyard. His guards still wore steppe armor. His decrees still carried the weight of Genghis Khan's law. In 1271, Kublai declared the beginning of a new dynasty, the Yuan Dynasty. It was meant to legitimize Mongol rule over China, not as conquerors but as rightful emperors. The name Yuan was chosen to signify origin and completeness, and it marked the beginning of a delicate balancing act, ruling one of the world's most sophisticated civilizations while remaining true to the values of the steppes. To complete his claim, Kublai needed to defeat the southern Song dynasty, which still held the fertile land south of the Yangtze River. The southern Song were wealthy, entrenched, and well defended. Their cities were massive, their walls thick, and their generals experienced. But the Mongols had patience. They laid siege after siege, wearing down resistance, cutting off supplies, and recruiting engineers to help breach defenses. They used Chinese gunpowder weapons, Persian siege machines, and Mongol cavalry to strike where the enemy least expected. In 1279, the final resistance collapsed at the naval battle of Yamen. The last Song emperor, a young boy, was carried into the sea by a loyal minister to avoid capture. With that, all of China fell under Mongol rule. Kublai was now the first non-Han emperor to rule all of China. His rule was, in many ways, enlightened. He invested in roads, granaries, canals, and tax reforms. He reduced the burden on farmers, protected merchants, and supported scholars. He allowed religious freedom across his empire, welcoming Buddhists, Muslims, Christians, Taoists, and shamans alike. And under his patronage, a global network flourished. The Silk Road, long a path of traders and travelers, now moved with unprecedented safety. Mongol guards protected caravans. Relay stations offered rest and fresh horses. Merchants from Venice, Persia, and Arabia traded silks, spices, jewels, and ideas. And from the west came travelers curious about this new Eastern Empire. Among them was a Venetian named Marco Polo. He arrived in China around 1275, along with his father and uncle. According to his later writings, Kublai Khan welcomed him at court and gave him posts of responsibility. Whether all his stories are true is debated, but what remains certain is this: the Mongol Empire had become a meeting place for the world. At the Yuan court, Mongolian princes dined with Persian astronomers, Indian yogis, and Nestorian Christian bishops. Messages arrived by horse from the Caspian Sea. Ships docked in southern ports carrying rice and jade. This was not just a military empire, it was a civilizational exchange, and yet there were tensions. Kublai's policies, though progressive in many ways, often favored Mongols and foreigners over native Chinese officials. Resentment grew. Floods, famines, and tax burdens sparked unrest. His armies suffered costly failures in attempts to invade Japan, Vietnam, and Java in particular. The disastrous typhoon that wrecked his invasion fleet in Japan became legendary. Kamikaze, or divine wind, said to have saved the island. As Kublai aged, he grew melancholic. His beloved wife Chabi died. His son and heir passed away before him. He withdrew from public life, growing heavier, more withdrawn, yet still holding on to the reins of power until his death in 1294. With his passing, the Yuan dynasty remained in place, but the unity of the Mongol world began to unravel. The other Khanates had long since drifted apart. In Persia, the Ilkhanate blended Mongol rule with Islamic traditions. In Central Asia, the Chagatai Khanate fractured into rival factions. The Golden Horde, ruling over the Russian steppes, had become a powerful force of its own, sometimes cooperating with the other Khans, often acting independently. This decentralization meant that the dream of a single, united Mongol empire was no longer possible. But the impact of that empire endured. In cities like Tabriz and Bukhara, new centers of art and learning emerged, funded by Mongol patrons. In China, Mongol rule brought both innovation and suffering, eventually leading to rebellion and the rise of the Ming dynasty in 1368. But even after the Mongols were pushed out, many of their administrative reforms remained. Their postal system, census practices, and religious tolerance shaped the governments that followed. In Russia, the experience of Mongol rule influenced everything from taxation to military organization. In Europe, fear of the Mongols transformed into fascination, leading to new diplomatic missions and trade connections. And in the centuries to come, the world would look back at the Mongol era not only for its destruction, but for its unprecedented connectivity. The Pax Mongolica, the Mongol peace, was a brief but transformative time when ideas moved almost as freely as armies. Gunpowder, printing, medical knowledge, and even pasta all flowed across continents under Mongol rule. While the conquest had been brutal, the results were often collaborative, and yet in the popular imagination Genghis Khan remained a figure of terror, destroyer of cities, a breaker of empires. But to the Mongols themselves, and to many scholars, he was something more complex: a lawgiver, a unifier, and a visionary who reshaped Eurasia. He began with nothing. He built the greatest land empire in history. His descendants ruled from the Yellow Sea to the Black Sea, from the forests of Siberia to the jungles of Southeast Asia. But even the mightiest of empires must yield to time. The Mongol dynasty in China fell to native Chinese rebels. The Ilkhanate dissolved into smaller kingdoms. The Golden Horde was gradually overtaken by the rising power of Moscow, and the Chagatai Khanate split and vanished by the 15th century. Only echoes remained, and yet not all was lost. The memory endured. Even today, the Mongol legacy can be found in unlikely places, in the structure of modern passports, inspired by the travel documents issued under Genghis Khan, in the international postal systems modeled on the Yam and the global trade networks that still echo the Silk Road routes the Mongols once secured. In Mongolia, Genghis Khan remains a national hero. His image appears on currency, statues, and in song. His name, once feared across the world, now stands as a symbol of resilience, innovation, and leadership. And perhaps that is the final chapter of his story, not in conquest, but in memory. As you lie here, drifting between wakefulness and rest, picture the vast steppe once more. The wind, gentle and cold. The stars, eternal and patient. A single rider, cloaked in fur, sits beside a fire. His horse sleeps nearby. In his hand is a bowl of warm milk. In his eyes, the fire of vision. Around him, the world is quiet. This is the sound of history sleeping. It is not the sound of battle, nor the roar of horses. It is the stillness after the storm. The slow breath of legacy, carried on the wind. Let that breath carry you now, as your thoughts fade, as your dreams deepen. The story of the Mongol Empire. It is vast, but for tonight, it rests beside you, gentle, watchful, and complete. Night falls once more over the vast grasslands. The embers of ancient fires flicker low. The wind glides over the hills, soft and constant, and somewhere far off, a horse exhales quietly in the cold. The empire that once thundered across continents is now a memory alive, not in the clamor of conquest, but in the slow breath of history. And as we drift further into this final chapter, we turn to the quieter stories, the long echoes of Genghis Khan's legacy, and the way it settled slowly into the soil of the world after the peak of Kublai Khan's reign. The descendants of Genghis faced the most formidable opponent of all time. Empires do not fall in a single day. They fade, gradually, through storms both within and without. In China, the Yuan Dynasty continued for nearly a century after Kublai's death, but it was a dynasty increasingly disconnected from the people it ruled. As Mongol elites enjoyed the luxury of the court, the peasants of China grew restless. Natural disasters, floods, droughts, and plagues were seen as omens. Heavy taxation and inflation added to the burden. In the 1340s, a devastating outbreak of the bubonic plague swept across Eurasia. It traveled quickly along the trade routes the Mongols had so carefully protected. From China to the Black Sea, from Italian ports to the heart of Europe, the disease left a trail of silence. Cities emptied, markets closed, millions died, and with them went the stability of empires. In the chaos, rebel leaders rose across China. One of them, a peasant monk named Yuan Dynasty, would lead a massive uprising against the Mongol court. Through determination, military acumen, and shrewd political alliances, he captured the capital of Dodoma, Beijing, in 1368. He declared the start of a new era, the Ming Dynasty. The Mongols, after ruling China for nearly 100 years, retreated to the steppes. The Yuan Dynasty ended, but its memory lingered to the Chinese. It had been a time of foreign rule, one of disruption and alien customs, but historians would later recognize the Yuan as a vital bridge, a time when East met West, when roads were built, knowledge exchanged, and the boundaries of empire stretched far beyond what China had known before. Elsewhere, the other branches of the Mongol family experienced their own transformations. In Persia, the Ilkhanate had thrived under rulers like Hulagu and Ghazan. These were Khans who converted to Islam, embraced Persian culture, and sponsored art, science, and architecture. The Mongol rulers of Persia built observatories, supported historians, and wrote their own chronicles of the past. But without a strong succession plan, the Ilkhanate fractured after 1335. Local dynasties rose in its place: Timurids, Safavids, and others, each bearing traces of Mongol influence in their art and administration in Central Asia. The Chagatai Khanate, once a vital link in the Silk Road chain, broke into eastern and western halves. Factional disputes and competing warlords made it unstable, and over time, Islamic rulers redefined the region's character. Yet even as new dynasties emerged, they claimed descent from Genghis Khan. His name still conferred legitimacy, still echoed in courts and chronicles. In the north and west, the Golden Horde endured the longest. Stretching across the Russian steppes and into Eastern Europe, it remained a powerful force for centuries. Russian principalities paid tribute to its Khans. Trade with the Black Sea continued under their watch. But eventually, Moscow grew in strength. Under princes like Ivan III, the Russian state slowly asserted its independence. The year 1480 marked a symbolic end. At the Ugra River, Ivan and the Great Horde faced each other, but no battle came. The Mongols withdrew. It was the last time a Khan would demand tribute from Muscovite rulers. From then on, Russia would grow stronger, and the horde would fade into history. Still, not all Mongol legacies faded. In the 14th and 15th centuries, a new power rose in Central Asia, Timur or Tamerlane, a warlord who claimed descent from the Mongols not by blood, but by spirit. He adopted their strategies, honored their laws, and ruled from Samarkand. Timur carved out his own empire, one that mirrored Genghis Khan's in ambition if not in scope. He burned cities, rebuilt others, and sought to rekindle the flame of Mongol greatness. But the world had changed, gunpowder had arrived, nation-states were emerging, the age of mounted empires was giving way to something else, something slower, more bureaucratic, more rooted in cities than in saddles. And yet, the spirit of the Mongol age still lingered in language and legend. In law, Turkic languages absorbed Mongol terms. Persian court rituals incorporated steppe traditions. In Eastern Europe, even the word for ruler, Khan, remained long after the Khans were gone. In Mongolia itself, the memory of Genghis Khan never left. Through the centuries, his name was whispered in prayers, sung in epics, invoked in oaths. He became more than a man. He became a symbol, a representation of strength, unity, and justice. In the 20th century, as Mongolia emerged from centuries of foreign influence, his image returned to the public sphere today. Statues of Genghis Khan stand tall across the country. His face adorns currency. His legacy is taught in schools, honored in festivals, and embedded in national pride. And beyond Mongolia, his story has come to be seen with new eyes for centuries. He was known in Europe and the Middle East as a destroyer barbarian who left only ashes, but modern historians have painted a more complex picture, one of a leader who abolished torture, promoted trade, allowed religious freedom, and elevated merit over birth. He was brutal, yes, but also visionary. He destroyed cities, but he built roads. He terrified kings, but he listened to the poor. And in doing so, he challenged the world to see power differently, not as a birthright, but as a responsibility. In his code, the Yasa, he outlined laws that valued discipline, loyalty, and justice. In his conquests, he integrated people from all walks of life, scholars, merchants, and warriors into a single vision. And in his death, he left behind not just an empire, but a framework for what empire could mean. A world connected, a world where messages could travel from the Pacific to the Danube in weeks, a world where Mongol envoys, under the protection of the great Khan, could move freely through deserts and mountains, carrying letters, goods, and dreams. That world is gone now, but its foundations are still beneath our feet. As you lie here in the quiet, the echoes of hooves on dry grass fade into a gentle hush. You are no longer in the tent of a Khan, nor the shadow of a palace. You are drifting, calmly, along the vast roads of history, carried by winds that have touched the shoulders of emperors and shepherds alike. The Mongol Empire was born in hardship, expanded in fire, and ended in silence. But its pulse still moves in our shared past. It reminds us that from nothing, something extraordinary can rise. That unity, though fragile, can build worlds. That law, when honored, can outlive the sword. And that even in the harshest lands, dreams can take root and change the course of humanity. So now, as your breath slows and your thoughts grow lighter, rest in the knowledge that you have wandered through one of history's great epics. You have traveled beside the sons of the steppe. You have seen cities rise, empires fall, and laws written beneath stars older than memory. There is nothing more to learn tonight. No more names, no more maps. Only stillness. Only the deep, wide silence of the eternal blue sky stretching from horizon to horizon, above all nations, above all time. Let it hold you. Let it carry you. Sleep well, traveler of the past.